Hello beautiful people, my name is Kristen. Thank you for stopping by my channel for my reading wrap up for the month of May. And I want to welcome so many new subscribers. I think you've come over from Krista's Books and Jams, and I just really appreciate her shout out and letting me be part of her reading slump video. Hope that you will find something here that interests you and helps you out, and you leave me a comment below so I can start to get to know you. I don't even know how many books, 10 or maybe 11, because I actually this month did an experiment. I am a one book at a time kind of girl, and this month several times I had up to 4 books going, usually 3 books at a time going. And I tell you, it was a learning. I think one of the most challenging things was I never really knew which one I wanted to pick up. And then it would take me a while, a page or two, to make sure I sorted everything in my mind. Like, oh no, that thought or that storyline belongs in a different book that I'm reading. So in that sense, I think I don't want to read more than 2 at a time, and maybe 2 very different stories or different genres so they don't cross over. But I enjoyed having more than one, and I ended up with 2 DNFs, 2 5 stars that I absolutely love, and I did 3 buddy reads. So let me tell you about the books. As always, I will hold them up. You can scroll along to the ones you want, but I will tell you, heads up, the last books that I'm going to talk about are actually the 5-star. So if you don't have time or want to come back and skip to the end. For my nonfiction this month, I read City of Oranges by Adam Lebor. This is a story that is told in Israel, Palestine, and I had said in my TBR that I hoped it had to do with oranges, and it does. In that regard, it's talking about the business side or the industry, agriculture of producing and selling oranges, and so it's giving us some background in that, as well as a couple families. And the really cool story about this was that the Arab family saved a Jew. Well, first, I guess it started from the Jewish perspective, who owned the land, and he helped out an Arab young boy who had gotten robbed. And so he took pity on him and gave him some money and some means to get back home, and took care of him and all this stuff, and established a bond between the families. And then when the Jews were being persecuted, that family saved his family, and there was back and forth. And this is nonfiction. This is based in true accounts. So this land that is turbulent and debated and switching hands, but looking at it from that kind of tie of family and kind of what's going on and how the families are trying to manage. It is a little overwhelming, to be honest, how much history back and forth, and I started getting lost trying to keep up with the dates and land ownerships and going back and forth of that nature. But it was a very enjoyable read, very educational. I really liked it. I had said that I would definitely read this one, and I would try to get to this one, which is The Lemon Tree by Sandy Tolan. And it is another story about an Arab, a Jew, and the Middle East. Very, very similar. This is also going very in depth to one Arab gentleman and one Jew, and going in depth in their stories. And the really cool thing is the lemon tree is in a house, and so the house was owned by the Arab family under Palestinian rule, and then there was the mass evacuation of the Jews back to their homelands, and all this fighting that occurred, and the Arabs thought they were leaving temporarily but ended up being gone for a long time. And then when they come back, there's actually a Jewish family that is now in their home. And so it centers around this humanitarian, and I really like the introduction in this, talking about how even people who are invested into this heritage feel like this book does a really good job of showing both sides, and it doesn't make them mad or angry or any of those things. They think that it's a solid account. So this one I have not finished. I did not get it finished in May, so I will finish the full review on that one in June. But those were really, really good nonfiction books. For my new release, I got Breathless by Amy McCulloch. This is a story, fictitious, of a reporter who is trying to kind of save her career. She hasn't had a lot of good storylines, and she's trying to get an interview with a person who is going to accomplish a goal of scaling 14 tall mountain peaks without the help of lines and oxygen tanks and all this superhuman kind of stuff. And so it is a really amazing book in the sense of creating an icy cold atmosphere and explaining the landscaping and going in depth about what it takes to climb, from raising funds to getting your equipment prepared to the sacrifices of travel and conditioning and all these kind of good things. That part was really, really enjoyable. The idea is that murders start happening. People start dying off, and so she's fearing for her life, and she's stuck on the mountain, and it's a survival thing. And so I was really excited about that kind of Agatha Christie, Then There Were None, in the, trapped, isolated murder mystery kind of thing. But to be honest, it was really the last chapter that she knew who the killer was, and she was running for her life. The entire book was nothing but the build up to it. So it was slow. It was a lot slower for a thriller than I liked, but I really did appreciate the storyline and all those other things that were going on. So it ended up being, more like a 3.5 going, that way. So that was my new release. Now, my classic was one of my buddy reads with my good friend Michelle at Books Cause Insomnia, and we read Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. This is a fairly well-known classic that is supposedly very beloved, but we read it together, and I was on page 120 when I finally just called Michelle and said, I don't think I'm going to finish this book. It is a magical realism, whereas it's told as if it's our world and our planet, but mystical things happen that you're supposed to just kind of go with. And a lot of people have given critique that there's a lot of similar names. So I was taking notes, and it's not the fact that the names are confusing. It's the fact that the plot, to me, in my opinion, is very confusing. It's like, I think such and such is going along and happening, and this is what we are doing. And all of a sudden, sometimes in the middle of the same paragraph, it starts talking about something else that's happening somewhere else. And I was struggling with what the connection was, or why did we just make that leap. It just felt very jarring to read this, and maybe it's a translation, or I don't know. If you have read this and you love this and want to give me some help or guidance, I wouldn't mind necessarily going back to it. But I even stopped and started to click over to Cliff Notes and Spark Notes and just started, because I thought maybe it was just a little over my pay grade and I could use some help about understanding what was the point or what was going on, or try to wrap my brain around the plot. And I couldn't find anything that was really helpful. Everybody was just like, oh, this is, maybe symbolic or an analogy, but I never got any definitive answer to what it's symbolic or an analogy of, and I couldn't figure it out. I'm not that smart. So anyway, I appreciate, the uniqueness or the writing in general, but I need help with that one. That's going to be put aside for until I can find my way out. Then the other DNF was actually one of my spins. There's the spins that Rick McDonald will do, and so he did 2, and number 9, I think, this is my number 9 book, To the Birdhouse, and it was my longest book that had been on my TBR. It was from the Dollar Tree, and so I started reading this one, and I didn't even make it the 100 pages in. I mean, it's not that long of a book, but it has a main character and a main storyline. It's a family drama, and the daughter is gonna, get married, but the mom and the new stepdad she's struggling with, and the stepdad is an extreme narcissistic controlling person, and he's lined up to be funny. Like, I read the blurb or the review of it, it's supposed to be funny, and to me, a ugly, controlling, narcissistic character, there is nothing funny about that, and I'm not going to do that. So that had to be a DNF. So that was my 2 DNFs. But my other spin number 17, was Winterglass, and this is actually a sequel to Spindlefire. This is a retelling young adult fantasy of Sleeping Beauty. And so I said, well, I'll just read them both. So read them both I did. They are very accessible, easy to read, kind of lower grade level comprehension wise. So perfect for younger readers. All of the sex and violence that is in it is left to the imagination in that regard. And I did really enjoy, I did want to know what was going to happen, because Sleeping Beauty has Aurora has a step sister, and there's some background that you're trying to figure out, but they are like bestest of friends, and Aurora doesn't have touch, and her sister Isabel is blind, and so they kind of grow up being each other's help for the senses that they're missing. Then there's a fairy world, and you learn kind of what the enchantments are that are troubling these sisters. And then of course Aurora has the spindle where she becomes Sleeping Beauty, and so there is a magical land, and there are actually fairy kind of sisters that are also dueling. And so it was very interesting and very clever, and the relationships and romances and Prince Charmings and things of that nature I really wrestled and struggled with. A lot of them were very, not even overdone, but it's kind of that thing where you fall in love at first sight kind of thing, but then maybe not. And so there was a ebb and flow of loyalties. There is just a lot of drama that was going on that felt very teenage drama. That would be a good summation. The romance felt very teenage drama-esque. So that was kind of a struggle for me, not gonna lie. But overall, I thought it was fun. I thought I'd appreciate it. There would be certain young adults that I would definitely recommend this to. If you're looking for a real sophisticated world or deep character development, or, adult type fairy tale, this would not be it. But if those other things appeal to you, I liked it well enough to recommend it for that. My next buddy read was with the lovely Sandy at Miss Reads a Lot. We read Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid. This starts out with a scene in a grocery store where a black young woman is caring for a white child and gets accused of basically kidnapping and really just mistreated. It gets up on film. You think this book is going to be about social justice issues or racial tensions, but it's really not. It's kind of a crazy bad romance. It's kind of a character driven plot on the mother in the story, who you couldn't tell if you were supposed to like her or not. You did actually, really like the main character and her kind of wrestling with, what choices she was going to make in her life to get ahead and succeed. But I mean, overall, it was just kind of meh. Sandy and I we read it quick, easy, like 2-day read. It was fine. We weren't sorry necessarily that we read it, but we were a little disappointed that it wasn't, didn't live into all that we felt like it could have been, if that makes sense. Now, my third buddy read was with the lovely Nikki at Red Dot Reads, and we read The Heart's Invisible Fury by John Boyne. This is set in Ireland and really is a coming of age story of a young man. We start and see his actual birth all the way through pretty much to his death. And I thought after reading the first couple sections that this would be a solid, easy 5-star, because it was just super fast paced, lots of characters that you would immediately latch on to, but I wrestled with the fact that there would always be this cliffhanger at the end of every chapter, and each chapter, or not chapter, but each section was 7 years. So it was very jarring to keep traveling 7 years, 7 years, 7 years. I mean, basically a whole lifetime, from birth all the way to his death. And we would jump about every 7 years and see snapshots. And at the end, there would be a cliffhanger that was over the top ridiculous. Like I was telling Nikki, it was like Home Alone. Like the idea that a young boy is left completely on accident on his own, and then he wards off robbers with a bunch of booby traps, and you're supposed to go with it and believe it, and not only go with it and believe it, but it's supposed to be hysterical. I don't personally think Home Alone is funny. I know that is an unpopular opinion, but it is true. And I felt like that was this style of book. Like there would be deaths or torture, kidnapping, all these things that would go on, but they were told in a campy way, like, oh, they didn't need that finger anyway, kind of thing. Like that was supposed to be funny, and it's just not to me. I have a hard time. I understand and I get it, but I had to set the book aside and take a couple days break, and I almost was thinking along the lines that maybe this wasn't the book for me, but then I just changed my mindset that this was how the writing was, because the truth is he was writing on very difficult situations, a lot of struggles with persecution of homosexuality. The main character, Cyril, is struggling with his sexuality, coming to terms with being homosexual in a place that was very hostile to that. And so it's dealing with that. It's dealing with a lot of political strife and regulations. It's dealing with a lot of issues throughout history, because again, we're talking about several decades that it's covering. And so it's covering some very heavy topics. And so I appreciate the fact that he was trying to lighten the mood and be funny about it. And once I changed that mindset, it became a very enjoyable book again, because his writing is very just well done, beautiful, deep characters, really witty dialogue. I laughed out loud multiple times that were my humor and, you know, could go with the story. So once I kind of switched, so going into this, what I would say is think that it's going to be that Home Alone kind of over the top humor to get through the deeper, more serious topics, but it is going to wrestle in a very powerful way. And because it did take those on and make some conclusions and make you think about them, I'm totally giving this 4.5 stars. It's not the 5-star because, again, of those reservations, but this is a really, really good book, and I ended up really liking it and really appreciated reading it with Nikki, because we just had extremely good dialogue, and she talked me off the ledge of quitting and just talked me through that, so that we were both enjoying it very thoroughly again. So that is that. Then I went on to pick up another classic, since I had DNF'd my other classic. And so I read The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy, and I have an interesting relationship with Thomas Hardy. I love Far From the Madding Crowd, and I strongly dislike Tessa de Uberbill, which is his most popular, famous book. So I started reading this one because I own the Clothbound Classic, and I also started listening to it on audio. So when I would drive long distance on a path that I know really well, so I don't have to focus too much on the road, I would listen to it, and then I'd come back and kind of finish it up with the physical book. And I love this book. This is my favorite Thomas Hardy by far. 5-star. It is the story, obviously, of the Mayor of Casterbridge, but it starts out with a man, woman, and their itty bitty baby, and they're walking along the road, and his writing is just so beautiful, descriptive in such an offhand way. You know, instead of saying, you know, it's a water hose, it would be the tube that puts forth the, you know, water into the spring, or, you know, maybe not literally, I just made that up, but that kind of language that was just always creating these great pictures for me. And they go into this kind of tavern place to get food, but the man's crutch or downfall is that when he drinks, he loses his temper and just gets out of control. And so sure enough, he drinks a little too much, and all of a sudden he is put out with his wife and offers to sell her basically off to a soldier who is in the tavern. And she believes it at that moment that it's actually possible, and he's kind of given her a hard time, and so she goes off thinking that she's going to be with this new husband. And of course he sleeps it off, and in the morning she's gone and he's gone. I guess he's deployed or he doesn't know what. So he tries to find his wife and child, but he can't. And so years go by, and he ends up being the mayor of a city and trying to do honorable, because he has pledged that he was 21 at the time he lost his temper and his wife. So for 21 years, he was not going to touch alcohol, and he becomes really, really honorable and just doing all these great things, right? Becoming successful in the business world and all this. So there is so much drama that goes on. It's like so many miscommunications and so many characters, that this person was here and this person was in the original tavern and this person was part of this, and then they were connected to that family because of that. And you do have to do that whole thing where everything is honorable, and if you pledge yourself to do something, you are going to do it no matter what cost. If you had like sexual relations with somebody, you were definitely engaged or going to marry them. It wasn't, that kind of thing was not casual, because you could disgrace your entire family name and forever be tainted, so that you had to make that right, kind of thing. So you have to go along with these old-fashioned kind of values, but as long as you're willing to do that, it is so much fun. I just loved this book. And then I should sit over a little because I'll show here. I listened to another audiobook because I got like a little coupon, or like this, you might be interested in this. And Beneath the Tamarind Tree by Isha Sesay was an amazing book. I am absolutely going to do a complete separate video on this book. It is the story of the girls from Chibok who were kidnapped by Boko Haram because they went to school. They were girls, and Boko Haram is a militant group that thinks that girls should not be educated, and they were causing terror in Nigeria, basically killing and kidnapping students, boys and girls. They go into this school. The boys were just day students, so they weren't present, and the girls were there, and it was 279 girls that were there that night that were kidnapped by Boko Haram in 2014. And so this reporter, who was born in Sierra Leone, and her grandmother was uneducated and then fought really, really hard to get her mother educated, and her mother ended up in like politics and vice presidency. And Isha ended up eventually in the States working for CNN and reporting, and this is her story of supporting this because it's very personal to her, right? Because she understands and appreciates that this could have easily been her. This is part of her story as a West African trying to get education and break out of these norms and cycles. And it was just giving me chills, and just told the point of view of 4 of the different girls and different things that happen to different groups of these girls. It is told through the eyes of the parents. It is nonfiction reports of a lot of research that she did, a lot of interviews that she did, and then her own story, and sharing all of that and talking about being a Black woman reporter and coming up through all of that and dealing with all of those norms in all of that political field, and talking about what the election in the States did and how that was a struggle. And so it is just amazing. If you have any interest at all in any of those topics, this is something to check out and to look at. So 5-star, best book I have read. I looked at my story graph. I have read 44 books so far. That's my number one so far. It was just that good and that powerful. So stay tuned for even more goodness, because there's a lot of trivia and tidbits that I'm pretty excited about. I almost forgot I read another book that I listened to on audio, Book Lovers. This is the same author who wrote People We Meet on Vacation, which I actually really love. Emily Henry, I just think that she and I get along really well. I'm not a big romance reader, but this rom-com kind of writing is right up my alley. So Book Lovers is the story of book people, obviously, a publisher person who takes the manuscript and tries to get it all ready for publishing. The male love interest is the editor, so she kind of needs to support him or encourage him to help her out, but they don't really like each other right off the bat. They have a very turbulent kind of first lunch and dinner, and then circumstances happen that bring them together into a small town kind of setup. There's a bunch of cliches, and they are book people, so they're even aware of it. The dialogue is super witty, super funny. The kind of kindling sexual tension is just really awesome, and gets you on the edge of your seat. Like, are these people going to admit that they're actually attracted to each other? It's like, and it's just fun. It's just fun to go with, and maybe it's a little over the top. Okay, sometimes it's over the top, but I'm okay with that in a rom-com kind of sitcom romance kind of way. Overall, I just give it a total 5-star for that genre. If I was interested in reading something like that, I would totally reread this book. I just think when you're in the mood for that, and that's what you're going for, that this delivers. So that is my reading for May. It was an incredible month. Great buddy reads. A couple that I DNF'd, but that's okay. There's nothing wrong with choosing what it is we spend our time with. Leave me a comment if you've read any of these, if you now have interest in reading any of these, and if there's anything else that you think I should be reading based on any of this. I'm always interested in that in my ever-growing wish list. I so appreciate you stopping by, taking time. I know my reviews can be a little wordy, but hopefully you learned something, and I certainly enjoyed spending time with you today. Take care, y'all. Have an awesome time. I got a hair. Do you ever do that? You have a hair and it's just bothering you? Okay, that's much better.